Hello everybody, today I'm here to introduce the Fuji GFX100RF. This is a 100 megapixel rangefinder. The thing that I like most about this camera is that I don't have to sacrifice image quality when it comes to convenience. If you had to ask me who is this camera for, I'm gonna go through my experience with the camera and I'm gonna let you be the judge, but I'm absolutely in love with this camera. Now this 100 megapixel sensor is coupled with a 5.7 million dot EVF that's offset. I also really love the articulating screen on this camera. It makes it really easy to shoot low, from up high, or if I simply want something that operates very similar to like a waist level viewfinder. So some people may ask, why a rangefinder? One of the benefits is having the built-in lens. I can easily sync all the way up to 1/4000th of a second, like you can see in shots here. And we're gonna get into more detail about exactly how I did that using a ProPhoto A10 flash right on top of the camera. The camera is so small, you can see that the flash easily dwarfed it, but using the flash either in TTL or here I'm using it in fully manual was flawless. And I'm glad that even though this is a beta test camera, using flash with it worked seamlessly. As you can see here in these images in which I was able to sync all the way up to 1/4000th of a second, popping my model off the background and almost making it seem like I stuck her on there with AI, but no, these were all done in camera. Now, another feature about this camera is I love all the tools it gives you for composition. For instance, it has a digital teleconverter. This allows you to simulate different lenses that you may want to use on this camera by having the camera crop in. What it's basically doing is cropping in on the sensor, but don't worry, because when you bring your raw files into Lightroom or Capture One, you can still fully access the entire file if you want, but while you're shooting and composing, it feels like a different lens. By simply tapping this switch in the front, you can simulate a 45, 63, and 80 millimeter lens, giving you a 35, 50, and 63 millimeter lens equivalent, by cropping in on the sensor. And at the 80 millimeter crop, you are still left with approximately a 32 megapixel file. Therefore, you're doing this without a huge amount of sacrifice, especially if you want to use this for professional applications. But if you are shooting JPEG, it will apply the crop to that JPEG. And the lens that the camera naturally uses is a 28 millimeter lens, which I really fell in love with and found myself shooting at 28 millimeters most of the time. I really found that this 28 millimeter lens was extremely sharp. Here are some shots I did pull back and you can see corner sharpness is unbelievable on this lens. For most of the day, I was shooting with the adapter ring and the lens hood on the camera, but to make this really compact, you can take off the lens filter and the adapter ring and putting on this little protective steel cover to get a very compact package. The one benefit of putting on the lens hood and the filter adapter is you get the benefit of weather sealing. The entire camera is weather resistant, and by putting on this filter adapter, you're able to make it completely weather resistant. But by taking it off, like I said before, you have a much more compact package. Another thing I really love about this camera is the fact I can quickly dial in the aspect ratios simply using this dial on top of the camera. These days, a lot of the pictures I'm shooting are for educational videos like this, in which I want to make sure that I'm composing for 16:9, because I often feel like it looks better in video if it takes up the full screen. Again, when I bring it into my raw processor, I could easily uncrop it if I like to, but having the crop in the camera when I'm composing makes it flawless. And it gives me a few options to view this. I can either completely black it out, or I can slightly gray it out, or I can just have this outline that easily enables me to see what my crop is. On previous cameras, I feel like I only have the option of the outline, and I really love the fact that I can just black it all out, and I can quickly access it by this dial on the top, which makes it a really seamless shooting experience. And a lot of these different aspect ratios were modeled after some legendary film cameras, like 65:24 coming from the Fuji GX680. Okay, so I have to be honest with you. In reviewing this camera is the first time that I actually read a manual to find out what everything does besides just taking it out and shooting it. And so I want to walk you around the way I set up the custom functions because it really made me fall in love with this camera. And I really think it's important in the process because a big part of this camera isn't only its looks, but also the feel. And so let me walk you through some of my favorite custom functions. First of all, this little function button at the top allows me to quickly turn eye autofocus on and off, just in case I want to creatively compose by just moving the little focus dot on the screen, or if I want to quickly switch back and use eye autofocus. Now I use that coupled with this little switch on the front, which quite honestly, I didn't know it did anything. But to my surprise, by simply pushing this button in, I was able to navigate to one of my favorite features without having to go through the menus, in which I can have the EVF either simulate what my exposure is, or I can just have it be on all the time. So when I'm using flash, I don't end up with like a dark screen. And simply by tapping through this button right here on the top, I can easily navigate through those settings. Another thing that I often do in choosing the focus settings is I like to go from a wide area to just a fixed point. I'm able to do that simply by moving this lever over to the left, adjusting the dial on the back to go from fixed point or wide, so that if I'm shooting with eye autofocus, I keep it on wide all the time. But when I want to creatively compose more, I like just the dot in which I'll move it around the screen to exactly what I want to focus on. Now, I'm not done there because I didn't know that you can long press this dial all the way over to the left-hand side. And this enables me to choose whether this control ring controls white balance or the film simulations. Yes, simply with the control ring on the front, I can turn it and I can scroll through all the different film simulations on the camera. I found this to be absolutely amazing. And it also works when you're using the digital teleconverter function as well. And when activating the 4-stop built-in ND filter, yes, so 4-stop built-in ND filter, again, I just hold this switch all the way to the right and it engages the 4-stop ND filter after holding it in for about 3 or 4 seconds. And to talk about all the buttons on the camera, I'm one of those people who often finds themselves like accidentally bumping into a switch and finding out I'm on a different ISO or I'm on a different shutter speed than I intended. With this camera, the buttons have this firmness to them. Like the dials are so tight that once you have the camera set up, even though it does have a feature where you can lock the functions, there really is no need to. It has the best feel out of any buttons I've ever used on any camera to date, given their size and the stiffness of them. I feel like when you pick this camera up, that's one of the things you're gonna notice for sure. Another cool feature that you can quickly access on this camera is basically like a built-in digital darkroom in which if you shoot a raw file, you can process out a file given any of Fuji's film simulations. So me, I'm one of those people who's basically gonna shoot raw all the time, and most of my work is gonna happen in post. But one of the things people really love about Fuji is the ability to dial in film simulations as they shoot. When you hit the play button and you're looking at an image to review and you hit the Q button, you're basically gonna enter the digital darkroom, which enables you to change modes like the film simulations, grain effects, and things of that nature, and then process out a new file if you like to. My guess is it's just super beneficial if you want to quickly get an image to a client or quickly download a picture to your phone or something like that and share it with someone. So when I'm testing out a camera, one of the things I like to do is really get a real world feel for it. Oftentimes these days, I find myself shooting more fashion and portraits, and I do street photography or documentary. So I felt like, let me take this camera into a place in which I'm most comfortable. Yes, I could have walked around and shot a lot of strangers, but I figured out it's gonna be better for me to get a feel for this camera by shooting something I'm very familiar with. So I did start out by jumping right into my comfort zone, and we started shooting on this rooftop inside New York with this Brooklyn Bridge in the background. I really wanted to get these beautiful, wide fashion images and really test out the flexibility of using this camera. And for me, the process was quite amazing because I could simply work with the camera as I wanted to. I don't feel like I ever needed to grab for another lens. I feel like the tools within the camera to really help me compose made it really, really fun to shoot with. Oftentimes when I'm just shooting for fun, I'll choose one lens and a camera and I'll go out and I'll shoot. And the thing that I don't like the most is I'm so used to shooting with my GFX100 II that when I use any other camera, I feel as if though I'm compromising. And so on this rooftop shoot, you can tell with these images, there's no compromise. They're really sharp. the control and flexibility the camera gave me in moving around, the LCD screen, being able to flip out, easily be able to look down on shots, to look up at the shots. I felt like the camera was just moving with me, and it was really, really easy to work with. These are some of my favorite images from the rooftop. Again, I was able to easily move around and quickly grab many different angles and work with our model pretty flawlessly with this shoot. In terms of the autofocus, it works similarly to the autofocus on my GFX100 II, if not exactly the same. I would switch between eye autofocus, or here I went and shot a picture of a bird as we were leaving the roof. It was a little pigeon, in which I was able to quickly switch settings and just go to that one point focus and get this shot of this pigeon with these leading lines coming to it, just resting on this bar. It's a New York City pigeon. They're not scared of people. After leaving the rooftop, we came down into the studio to initially just review images, but then I saw this beautiful light streaming into the studio. And I planned on doing a studio session just with available light, and I wanted to take advantage when the sun was at this ideal angle in which I knew it was going to come through the windows. So I was thinking about going back onto the roof, but figured it was going to be much better to stay here because I use this app called Sunseeker that I use to kind of see where light is going to end up. And so I said, you know what? Let's shoot in the studio. So I had our model change wardrobe and just using available light. Again, the camera just felt like it was one in my hands as I was shooting. I really like the wide angle because I like wide angle shots, especially working in an environment where I don't have to just keep someone stuck on seamless paper. And I was able to bounce through some of the different lens conversions, and still, again, once I saw that 28mm lens and the fact of how straight the lines are and how sharp it is, I pretty much stayed there the whole time. And these are some of my favorite shots when we came inside and I was just shooting with natural light. Now I want to go out in the real world and really test some of the features of this camera. So one of the things I was interested in is how would this 4-stop ND filter benefit me creatively, and syncing at 1/4000th of a second, how would that benefit me creatively as well? So first I started out, I wanted to do a shot in which the model was really still in a city street and there were cars and people and all this stuff going around her in the background. And I was able to catch that moving by putting on the 4-stop ND filter, shooting at 1 second. And I believe I was about around f11 or f16 for most of these shots. I had her stand really, really still. And then I would shoot these 1 second exposures. And here you can see the results of some of my favorite images or my favorite sequence from that shoot. Next, we took a break from this busy city street and we just moved over to the side, in which I got a chance to really test out the dynamic range by shooting a scene which was in full sun and then another section which was in shadows. It really just gives me an idea of how this camera works when there's extreme shadow detail and extreme highlight, because that's often the situation you're going to find if you're doing street or documentary photography. And so I did these samples really to show just how well it dealt with extreme shadows and highlights. And these are some of my favorite pictures from that test. And as you know, I shoot a lot of dance, and I was really excited when you could sync a flash up to 1/4000th of a second. So to keep it easy, I decided to go with flash on camera, and I had our model jumping in the middle of the street. And don't worry, this is probably one of the most heavily trafficked streets in the world when it comes to people traffic. So people are used to people just standing in the street taking pictures here in Brooklyn. So our model was not going to get hit by a car, even though some of the pictures may look like it. And I was able to have her just jumping in the street and capturing these images in which she kind of gets separated off the background and you see everything in the city just kind of going on behind her. I really love the fact that I can shoot at 1/4000th of a second effortlessly, bringing down all the ambient light and really focusing in our model. I use a Profoto A10 in order to accomplish this. And here you can see one of my favorite images of our model jumping, in which I shot it at ISO 320, 1/4000th of a second at f4, using on-camera flash. So please understand, after me going through this camera, that this is really a first look. It's not an exhaustive review in which I'm testing ISO and all these other things. I'm trusting that this basically has the same features as my GFX100 II when it comes to image quality. I just really want to know if the camera felt right. This is one of those cameras where if I'm just shooting BTS, if I'm shooting at like a family gathering, this is a camera I'm going to bring with me that I can document those things and not think that I'm sacrificing image quality, because it's the same image quality that I get off my GFX100 II. Does it have IBIS? No. Do I want it if it increased the size of this camera? Absolutely not. Could the lens be faster? Well, my Mamiya 6 was my go-to rangefinder before when I wanted to have fun, and it had an f4 lens. And so therefore, I'm very happy with the f4 on this lens, especially for the fact that A, it's sharp corner to corner, there's very little to no distortion, and it's compact size. I really don't want to change anything about the form factor of this camera. Going back to the shot where you see it compared to the GFX100 II and the Fuji X100V, you can see that this camera is barely wider than the X100V and just tall enough to fit that 100 megapixel sensor, which is 70% larger than a full frame sensor. I wouldn't change anything about this camera. Do I plan on getting it in my hands and doing a much more exhaustive test? Yes. But right now, it will be with a camera that I purchased. Or maybe I don't return this one because they didn't say I have to give it back. What's that rule that if you have it, that's 9/10 of the law? Whatever that rule is, well, I'm enacting it right now. I have this camera, I don't have to give it back because that's 9/10 of the law. So I'm throwing that other 10th out. My name is Ab Sesay. It was a pleasure giving you a first look at the Fuji GFX100RF, and I'm out. Because as you know, there's levels to this.